Welcome back to the program. We are joined today by Gilbert Doctorow, a historian and international affairs analyst, to discuss the growing pressure on President Putin, I guess, to give up on some of his restraints and even react more forcefully towards NATO. So thank you for coming on.
Well, it's a pleasure, except that I will not be bringing good tidings in this show.
Well, it does appear that we're moving somewhere quite dangerous. That is, only over the past few days, we've seen articles such as the one in Financial Times, where it's very open that the US is participating in attacks on Russian refineries. Again, hasn't been denied by the White House. Even Trump seems to be gloating as he speaks, and well, I would say largely exaggerates the gasoline queues in Russia. We have Hegseth talking about imposing cost on Russia, and Trump, of course, working overtime to sabotage the Russian economy, pressuring countries like India to stop trade. But also under Trump's rule, we see that the nuclear deterrent of Russia was attacked back in June. I saw a report yesterday by FSB which suggested that the British were directly involved in this attack on Russia's nuclear deterrent. Trump now openly talking about sending Tomahawks, which again could carry nuclear warheads. The Russians would also not be able to know. And again, if Russia sees a Tomahawk launched towards Russia, they can't really know if there's a nuclear warhead, if there's a first strike. So this must be taken into consideration in terms of how they retaliate and respond. So I guess for all of these reasons, we now see some more louder voices in Moscow, both from politicians as well as the media, which more or less sees this restraint as appeasement that will only produce a more dangerous situation as we now take further steps towards a direct war. And it's no one really has escalation control here, so it's not doesn't take that much imagination to see how such an escalation could lead to a nuclear exchange. So I don't know. I tend to agree with this assessment, though, that we're heading towards a possible direct war, again, with unthinkable consequences. And escalation control is an illusion that may essentially kill us all. So on that very dark, pessimistic start, I wanted to address an article you recently wrote on this topic as well, where you discussed the dilemma in terms of how Russia could respond to NATO's escalations. What are, the way you see it, the arguments for and against restraint on Russia's part?
Well, I will approach this question, shall I say, from a layman's standpoint, because you are the political scientist who looks at the theoretical considerations around deterrence, and that's a widely discussed issue. That's not my métier, but speaking as a layman, I see that Mr. Putin is, by willy-nilly, undermining Russia's deterrence by his restraint, showing off latest generation missiles and other armaments where Russia is years ahead of the West and the United States in particular. That isn't deterrence. Deterrence, finally, is a question of political will to use that arsenal. And it is not at all apparent that Mr. Putin has that will. His actions, his words in the last few months have spoken exactly the opposite. And in that sense, I say he has weakened Russia's deterrence. Now, where do I get this notion that there is opposition to Mr. Putin? Who is it? Is it the military? Are they plotting against him? Is the KGB plotting against him? I don't know. Nobody knows. But I can say the issue is not undercover. It is very much in people's eyes. And when I make reference now to Russian state television, I want to be sure that people understand that when I say talk show, I don't mean a talk show that you have coming out of NBC. This is not Meet the Nation. This is the voice of the Kremlin without being the Kremlin. Now, when people think about the tough voice coming out of Russia, they think about Mr. Medvedev, who was a weakling president and has been very busy the last 3 years trying to make up for it by super patriotism. Not the only one. There are a number of outstanding Russian political scientists and statesmen who have done the same thing, who are making up for their cuddly behavior towards the West by being overtly xenophobic today. But what am I talking about? I'm talking about Vladimir Solovyov and his show, The Evening with Solovyov. Who is he? Yes, he's the host of a talk show, but that doesn't tell you who he is. He is a close associate of Kiselyov, who is the director of all Russian state news on television. He is the protector of the hound dog who follows Putin everywhere, Zarubin. He is been favored by the Russian Defense Ministry to go to the front and to see things that nobody else sees, and to get into tanks, and to present interviews with people he considers to be special heroes from the front on his television program. So this is not just a chat show. This is a man who is very closely connected to Putin's circle, was part of his circle. And he's been saying, and I think about, you can find on YouTube, but bizarrely, it appeared yesterday on YouTube. I don't recall the kind of anonymous sponsor who put it on for Russian television, because Russian television by itself is banned from YouTube. The program of the 14th, it is labeled the program of the 15th. The 15th is when it was posted by this intermediary, program of Vladimir Solovyov. And what he says will shock you out of your skin. He's saying that Russia is prepared. Russia has allowed red lines to be crossed. It has not stood for its defense, that it has behaved weakly, and that this has to stop. That, well, let me go up. That this is not, we're no longer in a special military operation. Let's face the fact, we are now at war. At war. In that case, we don't care about humane behavior towards the enemy. The Ukrainians are our enemy. They're trying to do everything to destroy us, and we should respond the same way. We should now bomb all of the decision-making centers in Kyiv during the daytime to make sure that all the staff goes down with the buildings. Got it? We should also warn European countries, whoever has factories building weapons that are going to Ukraine, to evacuate their cities. Because, well, it's clear, this is an open threat to destroy European capitals. I'm in Brussels. We have in downtown Brussels one such factory. It was formerly a car factory. It's now making the various types of armaments for Ukraine. So the warning, this is a very direct warning. The most important thing I considered here was the mention of we're now, let's stop talking about it, an SMO. We are at war. I'm waiting for Putin to declare war. And I think it will happen as soon as either the tomahawks are delivered to Ukraine or something similar. That will be the provocation that allows him to do what people like Solovyov are demanding. And once you're at war, everything goes. At the same time, I'm sitting here in Brussels, where I can tell you from an inside source from Flemish newspaper that our Prime Minister, De Wever, is shaking in his boots over this business of Euroclear's 145 billion in Russian state assets being turned into collateral, because he's afraid, with good reason, that Brussels will be destroyed. So this is why I do not bring my usual note of encouragement to the audience, but I am as alarmed as you appear to be from your opening remarks. We are at a very serious stage.
Yeah, I don't see how a direct war now can be avoided, because again, if Russia shows restraint, then They will see this as a weakness in NATO, and the tomahawks will be delivered, which the Russians would then have to react to in the most fierce way. And if they do respond, then of course, look at the language we have in Europe. We have some few drones over an airport, and even after we find out that there's Europeans who have been flying them and arrested, we still talk about how this is a hybrid war by Russia. Like we seem so eager to pick a fight. I mean, once the Oreshniks begins to rain upon our production facilities and in logistics centers in Europe, I mean, this is going to be impossible to avoid war. This is, seems like we hit the end of the line. Otherwise, you mentioned the theories on deterrence. I mean, in deterrence, well, at least when I used to teach it, we focused on the 3 C's. You have to have the capabilities to deter. It has to be, well, obvious. You also need it to be, and the Russians do have this with especially the Oreshniks, which allows them to climb up the escalation ladder in a very aggressive way without going nuclear. The second is that it has to be credible, that you're willing to use this weapon, that once you cross a red line, they will be used. And all of this has to be communicated. So this kind of 3 C's all has to be present if you want a proper deterrent. But as you said, the desire to kind of hope that you can get along with Trump, it's undermining the credibility, and this is very, I guess, dangerous communication. I know, in the media, journalists will then hear this and say, well, oh, then you're supporting the Russians. But this is the problem, is not supporting this side or that side. It's once we go down this road, this is the war. The war becomes the main enemy. This is what would possibly destroy everyone. But still, it's not as if Putin is all naive either. What do you see as being the arguments then for and against these restraints? Because there are reasons why one should also be cautious.
No, cautious he always has been. That has been his byword in almost any policy that you look at. I'd like to just explain that people may be wondering why I am changing my opinion, not just about Mr. Putin, for whom I have great admiration in all he's achieved in saving Russia from ruin and giving it a phoenix-like rise to a great power status again. I don't deny any of that, but his behavior in the conduct of this war leaves many open questions over whether he still has the nerve to and the willingness to take risk that is imposed on you. You don't have a choice, but risk is on all sides. The question is, which risk do you choose to respond to, and what your calculations are. His calculations, I think, at this point are dead wrong, based on his reading of Trump, which I think is wrong. And then the second thing they'll say is, why am I now turning against Mr. Trump? Because first I was considered to be a dupe of Putin, and then I was considered by people who don't like what I say or write to be a dupe of Trump. Well, my answer to those points is very relevant to our discussion. It is that I am one of the few, unfortunately, who changes my views according to what I see in front of me. If the objective facts change, then my opinion changes, and the objective facts have changed. Mr. Trump, with this much heralded Gaza war solution, heralded by whom? Mostly by the wrong people, meaning the whole EU and all of the other sycophants around him. It is a phony peace settlement. It's a fraud. But unfortunately, he has been lionized. He wasn't given a Nobel Prize, but it came close to that. And he believes that his method of solving these crises by using maximum American force to compel the warring sides to strike a compromise. He believes that he succeeded. I think he's dead wrong on that. We'll find out in the next few weeks when the war breaks out again. But he thinks that worked, and he thinks it's applicable to the Russia-Ukraine war. That is why he's maximizing pressure on Russia now by saying falsely, by the way, yesterday that Mr. Modi had promised to stop buying Russian oil. I haven't. They will scale it back somewhat, and that was what the meeting today with the Saudis is all about. They're trying to raise their purchase of Saudi oil and also of U.S. oil but that doesn't mean they're going to stop buying Russian oil. Anyway, he believes that he has everybody in his hands, that he is the almighty ruler of the universe, and that everyone will follow his dictates. Well, up to a point, and he's reached that point. Russia is not a small patch of desert next to the Mediterranean Sea called Gaza. Russia is not a small Jewish state surrounded by 100 million Muslims or more, but fighting them off because of superior military capability. Russia is not a superpower, but a major international power with the world's largest stock of nuclear weapons and many other uh, uh, defense feats that are ahead of its peers and competitors by 10 years or more. And he cannot compel them to do his bidding or to sacrifice the reasons why they have lost 150,000 dead in this war for the sake of appeasing the vanity of one Donald Trump. That is not going to work. And instead, it may lead to a war that we will all suffer from. So I think everyone should be following this closely. I go to this prestigious social club here in Brussels, which brings together the main purpose of the club is to celebrate how important we all are and to have a good meal. Maybe it's a good reason for a club. But among these people who are very successful professionals in all areas, there's no awareness at all of what is going on. None. They pick up and read the newspapers, and they know as much as anyone reading New York Times, and that frightens me very much.
Yeah, it's no, I often feel the incompetence has reached this dangerous level as well. But this restraint, it's very openly now denounced by the Europeans as a weakness. That is, I saw Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, standing on stage, more or less beginning to emulate the kind of language and talk that Trump does. So he argues, the Russians, they can't even fly their jets, their ships are useless, so the Russians are weak, they're pointless, their economy is, smaller than Spain, or the usual talking points. So in other words, with Trump, of course, being one of the key people this message is intended for, and at the same time, Trump is powerful, he's strong, and if he only treats the Russians like he did with the Palestinians, then they will fall in line. I mean, this is you can almost see why Trump has abandoned this position he previously had. Keep in mind, back in February, he was uh, condemning Zelensky for playing with World War III. Now this Trump will seemingly trigger this, and also the Dutch defense minister arguing that, well, yeah, let's send the Tomahawks. No one's discussing anymore any of the consequences, what it will mean when a Tomahawk, possibly carrying a nuclear warhead from the Russian perspective, heads inwards towards Russian borders. I mean, how are they expected to respond? The only thing we have to respond is to say, well, they should have thought about this. They should get out of Ukraine. It's so empty and ridiculous. So I just don't see how it's possible to negotiate out of this anymore.
It's manifestly obvious that Mr. Trump is a bully. It's less manifestly obvious that most members of the US Congress are also bullies. It is incomprehensible to me that Vladimir Putin doesn't see this and know this and act the way he said he did as a scrappy kid in Leningrad in the courtyards when confronted with bullies. He said, you don't wait for them to hit you, you hit them first. Where is he now? I hope that he comes to his senses. I hope for all of us that he comes to his senses, because if he doesn't, he will be removed and replaced by people who really do not want to see in power in Russia, because they will be very aggressive, very xenophobic, and very ready to go into nuclear war. So it is to all of our advantage that Mr. Putin looks closely at what he's facing in Trump, which is a bully who will back down when his bluff is called. Nobody in the US government wants to die from Russian missiles? Nobody. They just don't believe that there's such a threat. They have to be reminded one way or another that the threat is there and will be operated. And I think they will all back down.
Again, I guess the reason why Putin's been restrained is it's a big gamble, but other reasons for the restraints possibly being temporary, though, because of course one of the reasons in NATO why we would like to do a temporary ceasefire is because well, the Ukrainians have to be able to mobilize more men. They have to prepare defensive lines. NATO needs time to ramp up its industrial production. There's a lot of reasons, but on the Russian side as well, they're also, I'm assuming now, preparing for a possible direct clash with Europe, as the Europeans are preparing to enter this war. Now, I'm assuming that during this time of restraint, the Russians have been building up plenty of Oreshniks and other weaponry, which is not intended for Ukraine. I mean, there's been a lot of a few months ago. There's a lot of reports in Western media as well that that the Russians were pumping out a lot of armored vehicles, but a few of them were sent to the front, like they're all building up in the back. I mean, there looks like there are many indications that there are now preparations for what seems increasingly unavoidable, which is now, direct war between NATO and Russia.
Well, let's look at the timeline. Last week, I made the remark that the conversion or the application of Russia's frozen assets into collateral for loans to Ukraine that will never be repaid, that this was connected with the bigger issue of when Europe is ready to go to war with Russia. And this was confirmed. I was I said pleased is the wrong word, because what we're talking about couldn't please anybody. But the fact of the matter is that the foreign minister of Poland, Sikorski, a day ago, said that with these funds from the frozen assets, Ukraine will be able to fight the war for 3 more years. This is exactly what I was saying. These two things are perfectly linked. This is a bridging loan to keep Russia distracted with Ukraine the war in Ukraine, while Europe prepares for 2028 or 2029 launch of a war against Russia, because it had bulked up sufficiently. These I really regret that the intimate linkage here is kept out of sight. But Mr. Sikorski, he told it all yesterday. They are linked.
So what is the way here, though? I mean, how can World War III now be avoided? I mean, well, of course, if I would give advice to NATO, I would say, de-escalate. If you're European, pick up a phone and talk to Putin. But we can't talk to the Russians. We seem determined to continue to escalate. But on the Russian side, though, what can they do at this point? I know the rhetoric in Europe is that, they should just leave Ukraine, but that doesn't really solve the war, because then NATO moves into Ukraine, and all the same problems. Well, the war wouldn't be over. So how what are possible pathways out of this? Because this is pretty much the most pessimistic I've been in terms of avoiding another world war since this whole thing began.
I think it's all in Putin's hands. And let me put this in perspective. I detected a week ago when there was this open conflict between Deputy Foreign Minister Ryabkov and Ushakov, the advisor to President Putin, and Peskov, the press secretary of Putin, over whether the spirit, the impulse of Anchorage, Alaska summit still is in effect, or whether it's been dissipated. Ryabkov said it's over, meaning the diplomatic path towards normalization with the United States is not viable. He was overruled publicly and unusually by these two gentlemen, and then by Putin himself. That never happens. For casual visitors to this show or to Russian affairs, they would have no sense of this. But those of us who are Russian watchers know this never happens. That the number 2 man at the foreign ministry is put in his place, or a man who is supposed to succeed Lavrov is put in his place in a very indecorous way. That was a tip-off that there's a big conflict going on at the top in Russia. Right in the center of the government. But then I want to put into perspective what I said about Solovyov and his denunciation of the go slow approach and of these SMO, the special military operation approach, as opposed to open war. I don't see that as the casse-paw of an opposition to Putin within the government or outside the government. I've already explained how Mr. Solovyov is so very close to Putin and to Putin's immediate spokespeople, not just this press secretary, but the man who oversees all of Russia's television programs on the news. So I believe that Putin himself is preparing to make this transition from the SMO to open declaration of war on Ukraine, which will change dramatically their behavior. They will destroy everything that exists. They will turn Kiev into rubble, not just the downtown Bankovaya Ulica, where the government offices are. And they will not look back. As Solovyov said, we will show humane consideration after we won the war, not before. So I think the ball is in Putin's court. I don't look for any big change here in the West and here in Europe. I think it'll come only after Putin declares war on Ukraine, which could be, as I said, could follow immediately on delivery or rumored delivery of Tomahawks, and that will change in a cardinal fashion the way the war is being prosecuted. That will save us all.
It looks like one of the reasons why Russia's been more constrained in terms of, as you say, going to an all-out war as opposed to a special military operation is both its the domestic situation as well as its partner states. That is, domestically, it was assumed that the public would be very critical if this amount of violence was used against Ukraine. But now, of course, with this last rounds of escalation from NATO, it looks like it would be the contrary, that the public would expect, or if not demand, a harder stance. But you also see some indication from, even not allies, but let's call them partners, that is China, India, I guess going softer, maintaining only a special military operation was also seen, I think, as not appearing too aggressive and violent in the eyes of the Chinese and the Indians. However, now with the escalations of NATO, they have a different consideration. Now, looking weak in front of their partners is also not ideal, because no matter how close partner you are, at some point, states will often bet on the winning horse, and if it looks that you're too weak, then your partners will turn away from you anyway. So it does seem like, again, all the indicators suggest that we're heading again towards this very dark place. But I guess when the Russian retaliation comes, what do you expect them to go after, though? Is it political, military target, infrastructure, inside Ukraine, outside? How do you see the possible climbing up the escalation ladder?
Well, let's differentiate between what the Russians will do to Ukraine and what the Russians will do to Western Europe or the United States. And you differentiate between the last two, of course. Attacking the United States is the last thing that Russia will do as it prepares for World War III. They have uncertainty about the competence of military and political judgment in Washington, and they know that the two countries can destroy life on Earth. So they would prefer any conflict with the United States to be the very last stage in an escalation. If the if the Tomahawks are shipped, I don't think they're going to attack if they're producers in the United States or any United States military assets outside the United States. I think the attack will be on the intermediate country, whether it's Norway or Denmark, whoever decides to carry the water for Washington and be the deliverer of Tomahawks. They will get hit. But as for Ukraine, I think the moment that Mr. Putin declares war on them, which is the first step that we take, there will be total destruction there. All at a conventional level, all using the restraint and all the other means at their disposal to lay waste to Ukraine so it starts to look like Gaza. That's in their power. And I think the feeling of enmity, of hatred for Ukraine has reached that point. So, as I say, there are three different levels of destruction here or response. The most severe will be against Ukraine. That'll be immediate, leveling it to the extent that they can or want to. The second will be hitting European military assets in Europe, but starting with those directly associated with the Tomahawk or other, because it's not necessarily a Tomahawk. The United States has a few other long-range missiles that it can deliver to Ukraine to do the job quite nicely. So, whatever is the country that is cooperating with the states, with NATO, and acting as NATO to deliver these to Ukraine, they will be struck in one way or another, probably in a military way, not civilian centers. Unless NATO declares war on Russia. In that case, watch out, because everything will be subject to attack, and it'll be subject to nuclear attack. That's another, I didn't mention that little detail, that Russia has made it plain that any war with NATO will be a nuclear war. They are not going to go into tank formations against Poland or anybody else. They will use their nuclear strength to eradicate the military forces and, if necessary, civilian populations of Western Europe.
So if we enter, I guess, a game theory, this would be a bet essentially on a game of chicken. That is, Russia would strike targets. It seems as if Germany would be kind of high on the list in terms of its potential industrial production, as well as its role as a logistics center, also its mere posture in all of this. But once this strike comes, it would then, given that Germany is a non-nuclear state, then it would essentially be a clear signal to the rest of the NATO alliance that the Russians would be, they're prepared to go all the way. And this is when NATO has the dilemma of either responding in a big way, which would then probably lead to a nuclear exchange, or back down. I know if NATO would ever back down, I guess under Trump's leadership would be the best bet on the Russian side, given that he has little. He doesn't seem to have much problem in terms of flipping his position back and forth.
Well, the Article 5, he's already trashed Article 5. So I don't think any European defense planners can reckon on the United States automatically coming to their aid if Russia attacks with nuclear or without nuclear. I don't think that the United States is going to risk New York, Los Angeles, Washington for the sake of Munich or Lyon. This is a given, and I think most people here in Europe and Brussels understand that. As I say, the ball really is in Putin's court to find a proper answer to what you described at the opening, which is complete condescension and disregard for Russia as a power. That cannot go on. It's only can lead to disaster.
I often make the point how awful the political leadership and media now is. I mean, imagine during the Cold War if someone would have done this. They say, let's openly attack key commercial targets deep inside Russia, military, political targets, again, directly by NATO countries. And any opposition would be dismissed as being pro-Soviet or something along those lines. I mean, it would the kind of irresponsibility would be unthinkable. But now it's the only response, it seems. I mean, this is it just feels like this is really the dumbest way one could possibly stumble into a third world war. But um, I guess just as a final question, do you think tomorrow, well, on Friday, this is when the Trump said he would make a decision on the Tomahawks. I guess that's really a good indication when we know whether or not, we're going down this path or not.
Well, irrespective of the Tomahawks, the situation is becoming critical. And I think the fact that this Solovyov program was so open as it was, this corresponds to the situation that we see in the massive pressure that Trump is applying to cut, to hurt severely as possible Russia's economy, the secondary sanctions, the assault he's made on Brazil, the assault he's made on uh, uh, the Indians. This is not supportable for a long time by Russia. You mentioned that the close allies in BRICS can move away from Russia if they feel it's not winning. I think they also can move away if they fear that the losses that the United States is imposing on them are unsustainable for their economies, too harmful for their population, for them to stand by Russia and take this beating. And I think that this also figures in to the calculation by Putin's advisors of when we have to go from an SMO to war. Can we last this out? Can we watch our closest friends abandon us under pressure from Trump? That would have enormous psychological impact on the Russian population, and it wouldn't be favorable to the government in power. So I think that Trump is overplaying his hand. I think you mentioned that on one of the, either with me or another program in the last week or so, the pressure applied, and then the spring releases itself in an unexpected and violent way. And I think that's what we're about to see, that Trump has overdone it and has misunderstood the limits to his power vis-a-vis Russia.
Yeah, I don't think he recognized the difference between the large powers and the small power, because a small power can be, like the Palestinians, can be forced to stand down, or any other. But the large powers, if you're China, Russia, standing down, it would be the first step towards your destruction. This interesting point Professor John Mersheimer has is he argues that one of the most fundamental things or dangerous things in the West is the refusal to recognize that Russia sees this war as being an existential threat, including NATO expansion on its borders. And but this is quite important, I think, because if you don't recognize that Russia sees this as existential, then that results in a massive miscalculation. And what happens when you mount this much pressure on it? Because the assumption or language you hear always from the Americans and Europeans is, oh, we just need to put more pressure on Putin, then he'll back down. But again, for the Russians, backing down here is an existential threat that would result in their eventual destruction. So there is only escalation here. And again, it looks, as if that's where we're heading now with, as you said, an actual war. Do you have any final thoughts before we finish off?
No, it's not. The outlook is not good, but the only comfort I can offer is that the first stage in a Russian escalation will be to annihilate Ukraine. No government in Kiev. This is not an ideal solution, and the people have written to me saying, "Oh, that's not the end of the war." Well, it avoids anything dire coming Russia's way out of whoever is running Ukraine. The chaos that will follow in Ukraine after the decapitation is not only of Mr. Zelensky and his immediate entourage. They were saying they being Mr. Solovyov, to use the Zareshniks and destroy Bankovaya, Ulica, and, well, the parliament with it, It's the whole political class in Kiev that they will annihilate. So there'll be chaos after that happens, and there'll be no opportunity for whatever is left to strike a blow of any consequence against Russia. So that is a comfort, not for those who are living in Kiev or for Ukrainians in general, who will probably find here in the streets of Brussels very soon, if any of this happens. But it is a comfort to the rest of us that it's not proceeding to bombing Western Europe, not to mention the United States. I think the whole thing will end with a show of force that destroys Ukraine. End of subject.
I want to get your opinion on one more thing. I just which I've thought about a lot before. That is, I'm wondering if another miscalculation for us in the West is that we have assumptions about the way Russia escalates. Because when we believe that it doesn't uphold its red lines, perhaps the Russians just escalate differently. I mean, often we do this gradual incrementalism where we escalate a little bit down, based on the extent to which the responses we get. But with the Russians, you see often that they hold back for a while, and then they go really, let's say overboard, that they react in a big way. So they don't do the incrementalism that NATO is renowned for. So I often think about the speech, last speech Putin gave around the time they annexed Crimea in 2014. And he used this analogy. He referred it to pushing a spring further and further back until it finally shoots out. And essentially, this was a reference to 20 years of warning, stop expanding NATO on our borders. So we will have to take action at some point. And then he said this was the spring idea. And then, of course, from 2014, we kind of gradually and develop the Ukrainian army, almost make it a de facto NATO member, ignore everything that comes out of Moscow, and then again 8 years later they come with this reaction where they again launch this invasion where they send in their military. And again, you can put this with after we began sending the weapons, they didn't do anything, and suddenly they go in and annex 4 regions. I mean, maybe it's just we don't know. Maybe we escalate. We go up and down the escalation ladder in a very different way than the Russians. So, but this is a problem with NATO's incrementalism as well. The reason why you do small steps forward is because the reason why you started with tanks, then you did HIMARS, then you did F-16s, things which we ourselves recognize could trigger World War III, because once you do another step, it's so small, it doesn't really matter. But once the response actually comes, it seems very disproportionate. But I mean, are we fooling ourselves? I guess is what I'm asking with this incrementalism.
Well, I would explain Russian incrementalism. It's been variable over this 10-year period. But one thing I want to dismiss is the notion that Russia was had by Minsk II, that they were deceived by Merkel and by Hollande, who had no intention of implementing this properly, and Putin more or less agreeing with that. I don't believe that for a moment on the Russian side. What people pay very little attention to is that Russia, which could have destroyed entirely the Ukrainian armed forces in 2014, didn't dare do that because it knew what would follow. An attack, and it didn't have to be a kinetic war. It could be just an economic attack on Russia, which it was totally unprepared to sustain. It took Russia 10 years to prepare for that eventuality and to survive the sanctions from hell. So maybe Ukraine was preparing its army the whole time, and Russia was preparing its economy the whole time, and its army as well. So there was a reason for this restraint because it was busy doing something that it couldn't talk about. I think the reason for that restraint ended in 2018, 2019, when they were satisfied that their latest offensive weapons and their rearming their nuclear triad had reached the point where they were superior and ahead of the United States for the first time ever in strategic weapons. And then they were prepared to make a move. So I would put their restraint in that. It's without calculating, a rather crafty restraint. It wasn't a naive and stupid restraint. But what have seen for the last few years looks more like a stupid restraint. No, I may be missing something. Perhaps they don't have more than 3 Russian troops when you actually count the noses here. There could be a reason for this, that they were lying about the production facility, and they don't have sufficient arms to match their words. That could be. But if that's not the case, if they really have been building, as you were suggesting a few minutes ago, a real cache of hardware to be used when needed, then the restraint doesn't make much sense. Use it or lose it. And if they fail to defend their interests, then they will lose it. So that's my answer to this question. It's not a simple question that you were asking, really.
No, well, no one from Moscow is giving me the facts of what's happening behind the scenes. But again, it is an hypothesis, though, that again, as you suggested, between 2014 and 22, Russia was making its its economy sanctions proof, and also preparing enough military force in case there would be a larger war. And after 2022 to 2025, they similarly went very slow and showed restraint, as they do, I guess, perhaps recognize that if Ukraine loses, or not if, but when Ukraine loses the war, that NATO might join in, and that appears to be what's happening now. So, having had 3.5 years to prepare, I'm guessing that again, I don't know what's happening inside the weapon depots, what kind of hypersonic missiles or Oreshniks they have been building up, but I'm assuming that they are quite aware that NATO would join in on the fight after Russia had exhausted itself a bit on the Ukrainians. Anyways, thank you for taking the time. This is a very dark topic, but I'll be very curious to see what happens tomorrow, because is Trump just bluffing, or is he actually going to go through with this, which can only be the tomahawks, that is, which can only be interpreted as a declaration of war. So thanks again.
All right. Thank you.